My stepsister, Lynn, and I were visiting her grandparents in Virginia. Her grandparents' house is in the countryside, with a 20-acre cornfield next to it. About 50 yards behind the house lays miles of forest. The first night we were there, we were unpacking and getting ready to go to sleep. There was a bunk bed in the guest room, which our younger siblings were going to sleep in. There was a couch and a pull-out bed in the living room, which Lynn and I decided to sleep in. We were channel surfing on the TV when we flipped to a show about urban legends in the United States. Since my stepsister and I have always had an interest in paranormal happenings, we decided to stop and watch for a few minutes. Something came on about a creature called Mothman. According to the show, sightings of Mothman were said to be mostly in Virginia, where we were, and Kentucky. So my stepsister and I looked at each other with our jaws dropped, because we always seemed to believe in these sorts of things. The next morning, we were messing around with a soccer ball. Lynn is on a soccer team, and she brings her soccer ball with her wherever she goes. My stepsister punted the ball into the cornfield. Oops, she smiled. We searched for hours and hours, but we could not find the ball, no matter how hard we looked. My stepsister was beside herself, because it was her favorite soccer ball. The next night, Lynn, our siblings, and I were all watching television in the living room. Suddenly, we heard a tremendous crash on the roof of the house. We all let out a yelp of terror and dashed under the hideaway bed's covers. Then, we heard footsteps, loud footsteps, as if something abnormally large was romping about on our roof. Our parents came into the room with wide eyes and asked us if we had dropped or broke something, but froze when they too heard the footsteps on the roof. My stepdad went over to the window and gazed out to the cornfield, which for some reason looked particularly ominous that night. As he looked, he saw my stepsister's soccer ball drop from the roof. He looked down, not knowing quite what it was because it had fallen so quickly. He ran outside and brought the ball inside. My stepsister grabbed the ball, smiling from ear to ear, happy to have it back at last. My stepdad and mom went back into the other room after saying goodnight. Suddenly, my stepsister looked at the ball and she frowned angrily. Furious, she yelled, "Look!" We all looked at the ball and saw 4 perfectly round holes in it. 2 very large ones about the size of a quarter, and about half an inch from those holes were 2 little holes about the size of dimes. It gave me the chills, and suddenly I had a recollection of the show that Lynn and I had watched the previous night. We looked at Josh and Ashley, our younger siblings, and told them to leave the room. Griping and groaning, they trudged off into their room. I looked at Lynn and said, "I know this sounds stupid, but could this be Mothman?" She let out a snort and said, "Don't be stupid." Nothing else peculiar happened that night, but stranger things were yet to come. For about a week, things went quite peacefully. By the next Thursday or Friday, we had forgotten all about the entire incident with the soccer ball. In the morning, we woke up and had breakfast. After washing the dishes, we wandered into the cornfield. After romping for about 5 minutes, we began to hear rustling noises in the corn crops nearby. We looked at each other and froze. Within a few more seconds, we heard a screeching and howling sound, somewhat similar to nails on a chalkboard. We fell to our knees, covering our ears. After it stopped, Lynn was so scared, tears were streaking down her cheeks. "We have to go back," she sobbed in a panicky voice. We heard the noise start up again, and she let out a scream as we dropped to our knees again. The noise seemed to be coming from up above us, and before either of us had had time to think twice about it, we looked up and saw something dart past us, quick as a flash. It had to have a wingspan of at least 10 feet. We both agreed later on that it had been a human-like figure with enormous wings. As we were running back to the house, we stumbled upon a baby deer, barely alive. We both let out a gasp and leaned closer to the deer. Suddenly, Lynn shouted, "Oh my God," and turned pale. "What?" I said. I looked to where she was pointing, and I saw 4 perfectly round holes in the deer's abdomen, just like the ones in the soccer ball. We ran back and told the story to our family. They did not believe us, and I doubt they ever will. Though it was too real not to believe, it still haunts Lynn and I to this day.
Driving on FM 157 between Venus and Mansfield, Texas, my daughter and I were on our way to Walmart. It was sometime in the fall of 2007, around dusk. From my left, something in the sky caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a trash bag that had gotten caught in a wind current. As it got nearer, it seemed to be descending, and I thought of a person stretched out in a glider. Even nearer and still descending, it looked like a human-like form with wings attached. Never once flapping its wings, it glided towards us, so close to the top of our car, it seemed as though it would land on top. The window was slightly rolled down, and I never heard a sound. I suddenly felt the need to roll my window up and didn't dare stop the car to see what it was. It looked dark brown or black, somewhere between the texture of a tow sack and leather, kind of raggedy and worn looking. It didn't have feathers. Once I realized what I was seeing, I immediately thought of the creature from Jeepers Creepers. Although I didn't see a face, it did have the body of a human, and the wings were somewhat like that of a bat, but not fully extended. I looked in all my rearview mirrors, but it seemed to have just disappeared. I know what my eyes saw, but my mind was telling me it wasn't real. I said nothing. My daughter didn't say anything either, so I thought that she must not have seen it. About 2 more miles down the road, I asked my daughter, "Did you see?" She immediately cut off my question and said, "Oh my God, yes! What in the hell was that?" I asked her what she had seen, and she said basically the same thing, except that she thought it was a tarp at first instead of a trash bag. After we had discussed what we saw, my daughter opened the inside cover of the sunroof to see if anything was on top of the car, just in case. But nothing was there. It seemed so unreal. After we got home later, we told my husband and stepson what we saw, and they just scoffed at us and said we were crazy. Maybe we are, but we know what we saw, and we don't dare tell just anyone of our experience.
Being a paranormal investigator, it is my responsibility to report as accurately as possible and in as much detail as possible any strange occurrence or sighting that happens my way. Over the last several years of doing this research, I've grown fairly adept at being able to discern small details in photos and videos. I use the same learned ability when doing ghost research, UFO skywatching, or any other research activity. It is in this same vein that I share this sighting that I personally witnessed on July 20th, 2005. I will not state emphatically that what I witnessed was the actual Mothman creature, but what I did witness had the general overall appearance of the creature as described by others. The time was around 10:30 p.m. The night sky had intermittent clouds, but I do not remember the fullness of the moon. I was traveling west on Bethesda-Arno Road in the Thompson Station, Bethesda, Williamson County area of Middle Tennessee, about 25 miles south of the Davidson County line of Nashville. My speed was 40 miles an hour, though the road is posted for 50. Bethesda-Arno is a typical country road, both curvy and straight, fairly narrow and bordered more by farmland than homes. At the exact spot of my sighting, there are 3 homes set back several hundred yards off the road on a fairly steep grade on the north side of the road. The south side of the road is bordered by a fairly steep slope with a thick hedgerow of mangled brush and trees, and is offset some 20 feet from the road. There were no other vehicles on the road, and my headlights were on full brightness. I first noticed the creature as I rounded a curve and continued onto a short straightaway with a slight rise in elevation. My estimated distance from the creature was 300 feet, and I immediately began to slow my car. The creature was standing a foot or two off the side of the road on the south side. Behind him was the back side of a 7.5 foot tall road sign. The sign was attached to a graded metal pole, and the sign itself was diamond-shaped and 3.5 feet in width from point to point, and attached some 3.5 feet up the pole from the ground. The top of the creature's head was several inches above the sign, though its feet were on the ground. This would have put the creature at nearly 8 feet tall. The creature's body was covering about 1/5 of the triangular sign. The head of the creature was human in shape, but with this peculiar triangular appearance as well. The head seemed a tad too large for the rest of its body. The neck was normal in appearance and attached to narrow shoulders. The chest appearance was normal, though narrower than one would have imagined. The chest area tapered down to a very thin-looking waist. The legs of the creature were long and slender, almost skinny, especially the thigh area extending down to the knees. Both arms were long and thin and connected to hands with 4 or 5 long slender fingers. The face of the creature was shrouded in a shadow-like appearance. I could discern no facial features. The creature's arms were outstretched, and attached to the wrists of both arms was dark webbing that extended downward and attached at the knees, and also was attached to the torso of the body directly at the underarm and extending downward to the knees. The webbing was solid in structure, with a slight tapering that came to a point midway to the knees and then continued to taper as above to the knees. From the shoulders down to the feet, with the exception of the arms and the webbing, the color of the creature was bright, reflective red. The color reminded me of paintings that depict the devil with his ever-present pitchfork, though I had absolutely no gut feeling that this creature was either the devil or any other type of religion-portrayed demon. My gut feeling told me that this was some type of unknown species that modern-day science insists does not exist. The duration of my sighting was a brightly lit 7 to 8 seconds. The distance at its nearest point was not more than 7 feet from the open window of my car as I passed the creature. Never once did the creature move or make any type of hostile gesture toward me. I managed to bring my car to a full stop some 100 yards past the creature. I immediately turned my car around in the middle of the road in the hopes of seeing the creature again, but it was for naught.
August of 2007, Ontario, Canada. My nephews and I were taking a walk behind a hill across the street from my house, when suddenly we noticed a strong smell. It was the familiar scent of death and rot. I assumed something had died in the nearby area. My nephews kept complaining about the acrid odor. It was more intense than any dead thing we'd ever come across. Not long after we noticed the smell, we heard a loud rustling sound in the tall grasses behind us. It scared me a bit, but the true fear hit me when I turned to investigate. Large, bright red eyes stared at me from the grassy area. A creature about 7 feet tall, with black, shiny skin that looked like that of a bat, long arms that reached almost to the ground, and a wingspan of about 8 feet. I yelled for my nephews to run, but they seemed to be in some sort of trance and would not move. The creature let out a blood-curdling screech, causing my nephew to cry. I pushed them forward to start them running, and I followed quickly after them. One of my nephews tripped and hurt his leg, so I had no choice but to carry him the rest of the way home. When we arrived at my house, my mother asked me why we'd gotten back so early. After I explained what happened, she called the police. Unfortunately, the police didn't take us seriously enough to even send a single unit. After things had died down a little that night, I heard a scratching sound on my living room window. I went to see what it was, only to be once again confronted by the tall, dark creature, its wide, red eyes peering silently in. I yelled for it to leave, but it just stood there, staring. I ran into the kitchen to get a knife, thinking that I would threaten it away, but before I got back, I heard that unforgettable screech and the sound of large flapping wings. I wasn't certain if the creature was mocking or taunting us. I just wanted it to leave. 2 weeks later, our house burned down. It makes me wonder if perhaps the creature, which I believe is commonly called the Mothman, was trying to give us some sort of warning as to what was going to happen. It may even have been an angel of some kind.
For hours and hours, but we could not find the ball, no matter how hard we looked. My stepsister was beside herself, because it was her favorite soccer ball. The next night, Lynn, our siblings, and I were all watching television in the living room. Suddenly, we heard a tremendous crash on the roof of the house. We all let out a stir, and I looked at each other with our jaws dropped, because we always seemed to believe in these sorts of things. The next morning, we were messing around with a soccer ball. Lynn is on a soccer team, and she brings her soccer ball with her wherever she goes. My stepsister punted the ball into the cornfield. Oops, she smiled. We searched for miles of forest. The first night we were there, we were unpacking and getting ready to go to sleep. There was a bunk bed in the guest room, which our younger siblings were going to sleep in. There was a couch and a pull-out bed in the living room, which Lynn and I decided to sleep in. We were channel surfing on the TV when we flipped to a show about urban legends in the United States. Since my stepsister and I have always had an interest in paranormal happenings, we decided to stop and watch for a few minutes. Something came on about a creature called Mothman. According to the show, sightings of Mothman were said to be mostly in Virginia, where we were, and Kentucky. So my stepsister Lynn and I were visiting her grandparents in Virginia. Her grandparents' house is in the countryside, with a 20-acre cornfield next to it. About 50 yards behind the house lays my